turn
down
the lights.
You're
listening to
Somewhere in Dreamland.
Welcome back, dreamers. I'm your host, Ken Mark, and you're listening to Somewhere in Dreamland. Be sure to check out the show on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, the UNX Network, and the Dreamland website at www.dreamlandpodcast.weebly.com, where you can check out the newly updated merch store and find an amazing selection of Somewhere in Dreamland t-shirts, stickers, beer glasses, and much, much more. Tonight, my guest is Bruce Orr. Bruce is a retired homicide investigator, the author of 5 books, a historian, a legend junkie, and the owner of Lost in Legend. Along with all this, Bruce is also a master scuba diver and a research diver, paranormal investigator, and a consultant for shows such as Ghost Adventures, Ghost Hunters, Mysteries at the Museum, My Ghost Story, and Ghost Brothers. All right, Bruce, well, how are you doing tonight?
Doing well. How are you, sir?
I'm good, man. I'm excited to talk with you because you are from my area.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's Charleston area in
Yorktown.
Yes, sir. And I learned about you while in downtown Summerville. I was walking around with the family and I saw a book called Haunted Summerville. And I'm like, wow, I've got to have this book now. And yeah, I saw that Bruce Orr wrote it. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to check Bruce Orr out and find out you're from the area. And here we are, man. So
awesome.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited to pick your brain about some of the things in this area.
Sounds good.
I'm fairly new to this area. We've been here for almost 3 years now. I bet you couldn't guess where we're from.
Well, I tell people either everybody from Ohio has moved to this area or there's no license plates on the cars in Ohio because they've all been stolen and put on vehicles here. So it's one of the two.
Yeah, it's definitely the first one. Like, because the weather up there is so terrible, we just migrate down here,
Right.
So I had a bit of culture shock moving down here because I was used to all of the whole spectrum of weirdness that comes along with Ohio. I mean, I don't know if you know much about Ohio, but it's one of the weirdest states in the whole entire place, right? Like, the people are weird, and there are so many different cryptozoological sightings up there, and you've got Wright-Patterson Air Force Base there, so you get the UFO things, and you get Bigfoot, and you get and then I moved down here, and I'm like, oh, they've got ghosts down here. That's like the only thing they have. But I did find a werewolf thing from 18 something.
Right.
And then when COVID happened, the Bigfoot sightings around in South Carolina just blew up all of a sudden. I don't know what that was about, but it was crazy.
I think with Ohio, they're more overt. Where we get in South Carolina, we're more covert with our paranormal aspect and supernatural aspect. I think once you get into the network, you start finding things. It's kind of like the Summerville book that you had mentioned. I had a hard time doing that one at first. And then it was like, once you got in with one person, then they would introduce you to another. It's like their ghosts were pets.
Yeah.
And it was like being involved in a pet show. Everybody had to outbrag their next one. So I think that's kind of the way the southern aspect of ghosts and paranormal and sightings and things are here. I think once you get your foot in the door, then you start finding out we've got a lizard man here, you've got witches there, you've got, some kind of pink creature back in history in Goose Creek, South Carolina.
The pink mess,
the pink mess. So you've got all that stuff and all those different ghost lights and everything else. And then hoodoo and root magic's a whole different ball game. So you've got all that. So, I mean, we do have the gamut. It's just a matter of just getting your foot in the door.
Well, I think you're right about that. I think you touched on something pretty important there. That people up north seem to be more, I don't want to say in tune with it, but they're more vocal about it. And people down here, there are so many, like almost, I don't even know how to put it. Like a lot of people don't like to talk about it down here because they're afraid something else is going to happen or whatever, you know.
Right. It's almost like if you acknowledge it exists, and then it's never going to turn you loose.
Yeah, it's like a social experiment almost.
Yeah,
it's kind of cool, you know. It is. But you're right. Like I've talked to several people down here, and once you get in, you know, your world starts opening up for sure.
It is.
Like I learned about, you know, the pink mess, and I always knew about the lizard man because the lizard man is just fantastic. And the pink mess was something that really got my my interest because, you know, I'm not far from Goose Creek, and
right.
that was in the newspapers and everything. You know, it was a doctor and his wife that saw that, right?
Right.
Yeah, so
that was quite a few years ago. And the funny thing is, I'm a diver, so I'm like, you know, what kind of pink blob am I going to come running across? You know, if I'm in the Cooper River or something.
Yeah, you never know. You never know, man.
Oh, my luck, it'll be an albino alligator or something.
Oh, yeah. I bet you run into alligators quite a bit, don't you?
I try not to. It has happened on occasion. As I explained to people as a diver, May is alligator mating season. So you've got to know how the process works. So a female gator will lay on the bottom of a river and a male gator will blow bubbles up underneath her chin to court her. So you're a diver, you're laying on the bottom of the river blowing bubbles. Big Daddy Gator thinks his old lady's cheating on him, so he comes in, bites first, asks questions later. So in other words, you don't dive in May. You just got to stay away from that area. But, you know, you got to know how the process works. So
that's fascinating, man.
So, yeah, you're in their territory. It's one thing to be looking from a boat down on them, and then when you're in the water looking eye level with them, that's a whole different ballgame. Oh,
yeah, I'll bet. Like, you aren't going to catch me doing that, Bruce. There's no way in hell. No way in hell.
It has its moments. I've had about 2 little close encounters at all the years I've been doing this, so it's worth it, though.
So I want to get a little background about you. I know we started off kind of tough, kind of like right into the thing, but I would really like to get some background so that my listeners can see where you're coming from and what your perspective is on everything, so they get the big picture.
Okay. Let's see. I'm actually a retired local law enforcement officer. I was a homicide investigator for quite a while. And then after I retired, everybody said, go out and write a book. So I did. And, the first book I wrote was a true crime story based off of a ghost tale over in Charleston at the old city jail involving a woman by the name of Lavinia Fisher. And according to the legend, Lavinia was accused of being the first female serial killer executed in America. That's a legend anyway. So I figured that's a pretty good tie-in for an old retired homicide investigator and old dead female serial killer. So I figured I'd write the history behind the hauntings and the fact behind the fiction. And I always had an interest in the paranormal side of things and ghost side of things. And I ended up writing about 4 more books on South Carolina's ghost tale, folklore, and legends. I've just stuck to my state. I figured there's enough in my state to last me a while. So I guess that's been about 2009, I started the research on the first book. Always loved the ghost stuff growing up, and just continued from there. I became a tour guide, and I've done tours. I've done paranormal investigations at many places. And actually, what I do is I've been involved with companies and hosted these investigations most of the time. I like to be an observer rather than a participant because you can see all kinds of things from that perspective. So I've probably hosted since 2012, probably 60 investigations at the Yorktown and multiple ones at the old city jail in Charleston. It's been unique. There's many other things and many other places I've bounced around. So it's been a blast.
Now, the jail, do you still do the tours there?
Well, what has happened is Bulldog Tours is a tour company that had exclusive rights to the jail. And it's the most haunted place in Charleston, South Carolina. But there's a company that owns it. So what they decided to do with this place is turn it into an office building with a museum on the bottom floor. So I want to be the first one they pick up the phone and call when they go in there and all their office furniture is stacked into a pyramid in the center of the room somewhere. And pick up the phone, call me, because this place, to give you a perspective of it, when Charleston was founded in 1670, they set aside a large area for a burial ground. And by the time the British invaded in 1780, that burial ground was filled with 36,000 people. And then they put a powder magazine there, which the British blew up and killed about 300 people in a massacre. And then in 1802, they decided to put a jail on that spot, and it was a jail with executions on the ground for about 137 years. So that's the foundation that whole place is built on. 36,000 people, a massacre of 300, and then 137 years of death and cruelty and depravity. And then let's turn it into an office building.
How long ago did they turn that into an office building? Because
they're still working on it. And all jokes aside, though, they had to do something with that place. The first little earthquake, tremor, or hurricane, we would lose it completely. So, I hate to see the changes, but they are put a museum in the bottom. It will come back, in some aspects, and it will still be there is the biggest thing, because the place was deteriorating by neglect.
Right. I did a tour there with my kids about a year and a half ago, maybe. I think it was there. Are there two jails?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah, it looks like almost like because I remember hearing about Lavinia Fisher.
Right.
So I actually think that you did our tour.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I did quite a few in there.
Because I was looking at your pictures and I'm like, this guy looks familiar. And I didn't know, because we did it with Bulldog. And that was, I remember at one point during that tour, we were standing in a hallway and the exit lights were the only things that were glowing. And there was a big storm just started while we were inside. And those lights flickered and my kids were scared to death. It was the greatest thing ever. They thought they saw a ghost everywhere they turned. Like it was so good.
That place will do it to you. And it's unique. The funny thing would be is everybody with the tour company wanted to do that tour until they heard the rules of doing the tour. There was about 70 guides associated with Bulldog, and everybody wanted to do the tour. But the rules of doing the tour is if you are the last tour guide doing the last tour, guess who shuts the building down by themselves? Yeah, and narrowed it down to about 7 people that wanted to do it. And then in the springtime, they'd hire a bunch of college students to go in there and start doing the tours. And by the time summer rolled around, not so many college students, but a lot of great new stories that you can add to the tour.
Oh, yeah. That place is really cool. That place is there's so much history in this area that that's what really fascinates me is the history. And
exactly,
it's really, really a cool area if you're a history buff, It
is, definitely. That's kind of the aspect of the books, too, because I'm a big history buff, too. And kind of what I do, don't tell anybody, but I try to hide a history story in a ghost tale. And the whole thought process of starting the books and starting my company called Lost in Legend back in 2010 is I went with a friend of mine to Florida, and I was a safety diver. He was taking a group of local students from Charleston to Florida to train them in scuba because the water visibility is so much greater there in those springs out there. So it's a safety issue, a field trip, go out there. I was the safety officer, and then at night, as they were camping at these campsites, we'd sit around the fire and tell ghost stories. And none of these kids knew the stories that my friend Rick and I had grown up with. So it was completely lost. And they were just mesmerized and enjoyed these stories. And that's how Lost in Legend came to be. And I wanted to hide a history lesson in the ghost tales, though. I wanted to tell local history, but young folks would pick up the book because of the ghost stories. And at this point, it's come full circle to the point where a few years back, Merrington School over there in Goose Creek, a middle school, actually their as a School of the Arts, and they were doing a play, basically, and they were acting out, the children were acting out ghost tales. So they asked me to come in and, help critique the characters and kind of help them with that. And things came full circle. It was great to see it all back into the schools in the same area where I grew up in. I mean, it had been completely forgotten, and it came back around, and now the books, fortunately, have gone into the South Carolina rooms and public libraries, and they've just gone into the research rooms and everything else like that. So I had a goal, and it actually came to fruition. I never expected it to go as well as it did, though.
That's all you can ask for, right?
Yeah,
it's perfect.
Full circle. Yep.
So I want to talk to you about one of my favorite spots here in the Low Country, the USS Yorktown. I love that ship. I have been on that ship 3 times now, and it has not disappointed me.
No.
I literally could spend all day on there. My wife has to drag me out of there. She's like, okay, let's go. I'm like, but it's something, there's something, it's like when people describe, areas of high strangeness. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
They usually say there's this electricity, this feeling, this weird, different air that you get with it. I get that there on that ship. First of all, the ship's been through hell and back, right?
Right.
And
right.
So it's going to definitely put off an energy, because I believe that that's what the paranormal is all about, is energy. But there's definitely a presence there that you can feel. Things are different when you step foot on that ship. Things are different.
It is. It's definitely part of that. I think is a feeling of reverence, for one, for the people that served on there and what they did. But then the ship itself, at times, it just has its own feel, and it changes. And I think that's part of that is with the paranormal aspect of it. We Bulldog Tours, again, does the tours there now. I started back in 2012. There was another company, and I actually was contacted to do research for a book on the Yorktown back then. So my intentions were to go out, spend a couple of months, interview a bunch of people, take a bunch of pictures, go rent a cabin in the mountains somewhere and write a book. And that was the end of it. But I'm still involved with the ship in 2022. So that should tell you, how much I fell in love with both the paranormal aspect, but also the historical aspect of the ship and the people that served. But I got involved with the first company developing that tour, and I think Bulldog took over in 2019. So somewhere along the lines there, my company, Lost in Legend, we did a study, and it was I think it was like a 24-month study called the Yorktown Paranormal Claim Study. So what we did is we took in that period of time, we took every sighting, every noise, every basically complaint of a paranormal sighting or a paranormal experience, everything from a bump to a sneeze to a full body apparition, and we documented. And then we debunked as much as we could. And then we started taking what we had left and correlating it to the moon phases. And what was funny was every time you go to do a tour, do an investigation, all the old timers that worked on the ship would tell you, oh, you're not going to have anything. Nothing's going to happen because, there's no moon, there's no nothing. And then when you got closer to a full moon, they would start telling you, hey, it's going to pick up, it's going to be active. Well, actually, there was some truth to that as we started documenting it. And it seems to be the more moon illumination that you had, either on both sides, waxing or waning, when you got closer to a full illumination, it ended up being more sightings all the way up to full body illumination. And as it burned back down, you started having it disappeared. You'd have from full body apparitions at a full moon to, as it starts burning down, you just have opaque shadow figures, then misty shadow figures, and it started dissipating all the way down to just bangs and bumps and whispers, and then disappear. And then it started building back up again.
Wow.
So there was some correlation to that. So, when it came to the Yorktown, it was again, It's almost like lunacy, lunatics with the lunar cycle or whatever, or the vampires, or excuse me, the werewolves and all that with the full moon. There's something that was triggering the ship, or it's causing that ship to be more active. And believe it or not, there's an individual by the name of Lee Ehrlich who runs paranormal divers out of Cape Coral, Florida. So he does this stuff underwater.
Interesting.
But I got involved with Lee Ehrlich on a project at one time. We sat and had a discussion. And part of the theory we kind of worked out is this is somewhat like maybe it's like a lunar panel. It's you take a saltwater battery, you fill it up, cells full of salt water, and you can create a saltwater battery that burns off,
Sure.
Gives off a charge. So the kind of theory that we were kind of working with, and I'm by no means a quantum physicist or scientist in any aspect, but that the thing was charging up. That flight deck would act like a big lunar panel and charge that ship up, and the greater illumination you had, the more power it was charged up, and then it would burn back down. So that was one of the working theories that we kind of went with. Again, I don't have the funding or the the scientific background, but it seemed like that's what was happening with the ship, and still happens with the ship.
Well, just by observation, you can narrow it down to that. It sounds like, I mean, that's simple. That's scientific observation 101 there. Right? Yeah, I don't think you need to be a scientist to figure out that by default, if this stuff is ramping up and happening with the moon, that tells you something. It'd be really interesting to go further into that theory, because I find that theory super fascinating. I mean,
I wish there were times when it's kind of, you take it to the halfway point with like my company in Lost and Legend. I wish at that point I could hand it off to somebody.
Yeah.
And somebody else could take the ball and run with it. I would love to see somebody start looking at ghosts from maybe a quantum physics aspect or something. But I guess I try to draw the line between entertainment and, scientific aspects. So that's kind of one of the reasons why I like to sit and observe and see what's happening and let the other people entertain themselves while they're doing their things on these investigations. And I think my biggest pet peeve, I guess, from the scientific aspect is that when you get to ghost to science equals spirit, which equals soul, which equals religion, which stay away from it if there's anything that deals with religion.
Yeah.
And I think they miss out on it, because I think the equation should be ghost equals spirit equals energy. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. So where does it go once that, so on, and go back into a quantum physics aspect of it. And I wish you could get more scientific research into that aspect of it.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, I wish so too. It would be very interesting to go a little bit further with the moon thing and see how that would affect I guess I'm trying to say, go back in history and with certain ghost ship sightings and things like that. Because there have been plenty of them, and see what the moon cycle was like when those were spotted.
Yeah, I think that would. I really do think they might come up with something a little surprising when it comes to that.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the other theories that kind of fits in with that is water. Paranormal activity, usually 9 times out of 10, there's water around when somebody has paranormal activity, either an underground spring or a river in the backyard or anything like that. There's usually paranormal activity around running water for whatever reason. And I mean, you've got both of those things right there on that ship, And
the funny thing is, you're correct with the running water around or near. The funny thing is, when you get into the water or under the water or having to cross the water, then you get into some of the southern and the Gullah and the hoodoo stuff about spirits can't cross over bodies of water, or once they're immersed in water, that's the end of it. When you get into those type of traditions, as I was told one time, there were so many crews that died on the CSS Hunley sub. But why isn't it one of the most haunted vessels? And somebody from, with a Gullah background said because it was underwater for so many hundreds of years and ghosts can't travel through water.
That's interesting.
So you've got that kind of theory too, although I beg to differ because I ended up running into a cavern in Florida at 100 feet underwater. So, and Lee Ehrlich, I beg to differ with that too, as far as that aspect of it, since he does this stuff underwater. So,
yeah, that is fascinating. And the water part with the hoodoo and the Geechee and all that, that's why I learned moving down here, that's why all the porches are painted blue on the ceiling.
Exactly. You beat me to it. That haint blue signifies water, and they're not able to cross them to the thresholds.
Yeah, we were sitting at, I think it was Poogan's porch or something like that one time. And I'm like, why in the hell? I told my wife, why in the hell is every ceiling's porch or porch's ceiling here painted blue? And she's like, I don't know. I'm like, I'm going to look this up. I've got to figure it. It drives me nuts, So I started looking it up and I'm like, oh, this is a real thing. Like, wow, that's really cool.
I actually have here at the house, I have the windows and the door frames have haint blue around it. And it's kind of like a conversation piece. That's what we say. But then again, why be haunted on a technicality? We keep all this stuff out on the outside. Wherever I go, why have something follow me back,
Right.
Yeah.
So how does the underwater paranormal investigations, how does that work? How do they do that?
Lee is an interesting character. I went on a couple land-based projects with him, and I ended up with one in Key Largo, Florida, which didn't work out real well for me. But what he does, he creates his own equipment, and he can actually go into places and find pockets in ships that he's talked about, air pockets, and record EVPs and things like that. He's got some interesting things, and pockets of derelict ships or wrecked ships and things of that nature. So, the one that we did was the Spiegel Grove, and that was in Key Largo, Florida. We were actually doing it for a potential pilot for a TV series at one point back many years ago. And the story of the ship is they sunk it as an artificial reef, and it flipped over and was unsafe to dive. And then eventually it righted itself. People went and dove it anyway and said, hey, this ship that you said was a problem and a hazard, it's sitting where it's supposed to be. It's right side up. So they went and checked, and sure enough, it was. But then it started having a history of killing divers and killing them in groups, unfortunately, multiple divers dying inside that ship. So we went down there to do an episode or to film this pilot, and yours truly ended up having problems on the deck of that ship at about 80 feet, had to do a controlled emergency ascent to get off the top of the ship, and was unconscious by the time I hit the top of the water.
Oh, no.
And then they got me out, took me to the hospital, and ended up in the hospital, didn't have the bends or anything like that or decompression sickness, and found no reason for it, no explanation for it. I, at that time, had a clean bill of health. I was just ready to get out of the hospital. My wife came to get me, and the woman asked me if I needed a wheelchair to leave. I said, if you got a rope, I'll rappel out of this son of a gun just to get out of here. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to get out of Florida at that point. So,
yeah.
No, it's no explanation for it. And so, fortunately, I wasn't one of the ones that went to the other side, but it's a unique and interesting vessel. I think it's up to 15 people it's killed now or something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Wow.
So
now that isn't the only big issue you've had underwater while diving, is it?
I've had I had an experience in a cavern, and that's how I got involved with Lee Ehrlich. I was diving in a cavern, again in Florida, and this was actually training some folks. And last dive, it's on private property, and I won't cause the person that passed away down in there. And the location, I'm not going to mention the name, but as part of a spring-fed cavern, we were diving in it. Me and another person were last two to go in it. We got to 100 feet and had an experience. Something actually felt like something attacked me down there. Ended up on my back, drove me to the bottom of the cavern. Felt like it was trying to get my air supply. And I guess trying to make a long story short, got back up to about 30 feet and thought I was having what's called nitrogen narcosis, where if you're breathing off of air at depth, you can actually become intoxicated. And people have literally done things like take their regulator out of their mouth and try to give the fish the regulator so they can breathe.
Oh, wow.
It can really mess with you. So that's actually what I was having when I started to, do my stop before I ascended out of that cavern. Get out of the cavern, and about a week later, somebody is asked me if I had anything on nitrogen narcosis. And I said, as a matter of fact, I just had a GoPro video on a dive that I was doing in Florida. Let me take a look at it and see what we got, because I think I just had it. And then looking at the video, cameras don't have nitrogen narcosis. So that camera actually caught a lot of interesting things, including part of the face of a third diver when there were only two of us in there.
Ooh.
And that got sent to Lee Ehrlich, and that's how I became involved with Lee Ehrlich and Paranormal Divers, because apparently he did the research, found out that a person had drowned further down in that cavern. And it's the equivalent of somebody jumping on me trying to obtain my air supply. So I've had that happen in reality with a diver trying to take my air supply, panicked. And that's exactly what it felt like when I was wrestling with absolutely nothing in the bottom of the cavern. But the weight of it pushed me all the way to the bottom. So
that is scary, man. That is truly terrifying.
That is, because, you can't live without air.
Right.
And, as I've said multiple times telling this story, when you're on land, you can Scooby-Doo it. You can run like Scooby and Shaggy from room to room all over the place. If you're at 100 feet, you've got 30 feet to spend about 3 minutes there, and trying to be able to ascend without you blowing out your lungs. So you've got a dead spot. You just got to stop. You got to deal with whatever it is for, 3 or 4 minutes, 5 minutes or whatever. So, it's not like Scooby-Doo. You can't Scooby-Doo underwater. No,
not at all. Not at all.
I actually had an opportunity at one time, and we're going back in time. Brian Harnois, who was with Taps and the original Ghost Hunters and the TV show, he was a Dude Run guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dude Run. It was a Eastern State Penitentiary or something, where he had the counter and he had an encounter and he took off from it. He actually signed something to me and told me, dude, swim after that story, after he heard that story. Like, dude, swim. It's like, you can't swim, but so far.
That's great, man.
Yeah.
So you have a YouTube channel, too. Tell me about this YouTube channel.
Well, it's a friend of mine, and I had a YouTube channel. We've had so many recent non-compete clauses and things that we've signed. We haven't been doing much with it because we can't kind of sync it. She'll have one and then I'll have one, and it's kind of fallen to the wayside for a little bit. But it's called History in the Shadows. And being a former law enforcement officer, one thing that I didn't get along real well with was attorneys. And then when I got into the paranormal field, psychics, mediums, and witches, I just did not get along with real well at all either. And that's just, I guess it's my personality. So I met this woman, Andrea St. Amand, and Andrea is a former attorney who is now a psychic medium. So it's like gas and oil, or, gas and fire trying to do this stuff. So, I met her as we talked about, the old city jail. She came up to meet me one time. She knew who I was, and she kind of recognized me. And she was doing tours out there, and she came to talk to me. And when she came up to talk to me, she couldn't hardly speak. She introduced herself, and then she started having all these symptoms. Her chest was beating heavy. Her heart was beating heavy. She was sweating profusely, and I didn't know she was having a heat stroke or what, but, I kind of, she's an attractive woman. So I'm thinking, maybe I still got it. Maybe I still got it going on. This woman can't even speak. She's like, I don't know why I can't talk. I'm just feeling real funny. And I'm like, well, I'll give you my phone number here, and here's my business card. Just call me. We'll set up lunch and we'll talk. And she just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And then the next day I went diving and I had a heart attack on the bottom of the river.
Oh, wow.
So I think what Andrea was experiencing was all the symptoms that I was going to have the next day.
Wow.
That was I think that was probably the kind of stomp the brakes kind of thing. It's like, whoa, there might be a little more to this than meets the eye, because she had every symptom I had in the river. And in some aspects of it, if it wasn't for knowing that and kind of figuring that out as I go, I might not be here, because 30 feet down on the bottom of the Cooper River and limited visibility is not the best place to have a heart attack.
No, not at all. Like, again, nobody can get to you,
No, and I'm diving with a partner, but you're nowhere near each other and you can't see each other anyway. So, you have to self-rescue and come out of that. But that was one of quite a few things that Andrea surprised me with. So it's been, a unique relationship doing History in the Shadows and a few other projects too. So hopefully we'll get back to doing those videos. They were a lot of fun. I will give a warning of them. They're adult oriented type of videos, adult language and adult subject matter. So, for all the wee ones out there, stay away from that stuff. That's bad for you. Yeah, we kind of like, there's one we talk about the ladies of the evening, so to speak, in Charleston. And
okay.
Most people don't realize that St. Nicholas is also the patron saint of prostitutes. So, so he had a side hustle. So he was making money on the side. That would explain the ho 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 part too. So,
geez.
I had to go there.
That's great, man. That's one of my kind of jokes. My kids would not laugh at that. They'd go, okay, but I think it's hilarious.
Yeah. Well, I'm a dad, stepdad, and a granddad, so I'm obligated by contract to do those stupid dad jokes.
Yeah,
so.
That's what makes your day, right? That you feel important.
Exactly it. That's it.
So I want to ask you a little bit about Summerville here, my town that I live in.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard some things, and I've seen some things, and I've actually heard that that the library, not the old one, but the new one, is haunted.
Right.
How's that work out?
I went to several of the older ones looking for the ghost stories, and no ghost stories. So what ends up happening is I go and talk to people at the new library, and they tell me that it was built on top of a Civil War hospital, and that it ended up having ghosts, being haunted. And it would be the Civil War soldiers from the location.
A lot of people don't think just because it's a newer building that it could be haunted. But I mean, heck, just on my show, I've proven that wrong several times, Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I did. That was my problem, is I went to a location to try and thinking, oh, well, this is an older building. It's built in the 1800s. It's got to be haunted. And that wasn't the case. It was a more modern building built in the 70s that was actually haunted.
Yeah, that's super interesting. What would you say is the most haunted location here in Summerville?
Oh, gosh. Most haunted location in Summerville.
In your opinion, anyway.
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, there's multiple places. I would have said the old Summerville Light Road, but that's next in development kind of took that out of the equation.
Yeah.
So Montrose Bar and Grill is one over there. Now, that whole area has ghostly sightings, everything. If you're talking about, I think, Hutchinson Square?
Yeah.
Yeah, that whole area right there. You got, from the corner, you've got Montrose Bar, it's haunted. You've got Garen's Pharmacy. That would probably, there you go. That would probably be my one that I think is the most haunted, is Garen's Pharmacy right there, because it's been in operation ever since the end of the Civil War. And It's the oldest operating pharmacy in the state of South Carolina, and it's never shut down. But they have multiple ghosts inside that place. But that whole area right there, like I said, Montrose, Guerin's Pharmacy, there was an architect place right there. You've got the James F. Dean Theater right across the street. All those places are haunted right through that whole place.
Yeah, there's what's that old Irish bar that's right in there?
I can't think of the name, but I know where you're talking about.
Me either. I was there one time with my wife. Not a great bar. I mean, I'll be honest with you. Not my favorite place. They don't even have drafts.
Well, maybe that's a good reason why we didn't remember the name. Then.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. But I'll tell you what. We sat in there for about an hour, and I was getting a little creeped out, looking over my shoulder and getting weird feelings.
Yeah, Summerville. The reason I did the Summerville book is Charleston. I mean, so many people have covered Charleston very well, the ghost aspect of it. And I went in that library that you mentioned and looked for Summerville ghosts. And there were actually 2 books that had ghost stories about Summerville in it, according to tell you how long ago this was. Did the card catalog. So
nice.
Yeah. So I went in there and there were only 2 books that had ghost stories in them. And actually only one of the books had a story. It was actually connected to Summerville, South Carolina. So I'm like, no one has done a book on Summerville's ghosts. And Summerville is indeed one of our most haunted cities in the state. So that's kind of how that came to fruition.
That's interesting. You know, you know where the Walmart is there in Summerville, the big one there on Main Street?
Right.
My son used to work at the Hardee's over there. So I used to go over late night and pick him up, you know. And the kids had me all into the Pokemon Go game at one point. We were trying to get, you know, it was a competition thing, trying to get better Pokemon than them. And so when
did you end up with a Pokemon in the graveyard?
That graveyard blew my mind. I did.
I knew where you were going with that.
Yeah, it said you've got a Charizard or whatever, and it's over here at this graveyard or cemetery. And I'm like, where the hell is this cemetery? That is the most bizarre cemetery I've ever seen in my whole life.
Right in the middle of Main Street, framed by Walmart, you know, a Waffle House.
Yeah, the entrance to get in and out of there, you go right past it. Like it blew my mind, man.
Yeah, it's surrounded by Walmart, Waffle House, and Hardy. So that is the most American redneck graveyard. I think in the South, it's like you can go visit your friends and, you know, get your hash browns covered, smothered, chunked, and capped at the same time.
I told my wife next time we went by there, I said, do you know there's a cemetery here, a graveyard? And she goes, no, there's not. And I go, right there. We just drove past it. She goes, are you kidding me? And I'm like, no, it's like right here. So, yeah, we got out and looked, and sure enough, their headstones there and everything. And I was like, wow, man, it was so crazy, man. It blew my mind. I'm not going to lie. It really blew my mind.
That's awesome. That's an awesome story. Yeah, you gotta love the South.
Yeah, I've never seen anything like that, but it's definitely it's cool. It's definitely whenever family comes down here now, I'm always like, oh, you got to check out the cemetery, this graveyard. You gotta check it out. Like, it was really cool. So, you're one of the only. I don't know how to put this, man. You had a lineup with a ghost in it one time, right?
Oh, gracious. Right. Again, back at Summerville, there is a house over near Rawlings School of the Arts. And at that time, it was owned by a person by the name of Michelle List. So the way the houses were listed was the original builder and the current owner. So at that time, it was called the Quackenbush List Home. Somebody else has now purchased this. So it's same location, same house, just a different name at this point. But the story over there was that folks, ladies in particular, would wake up and there would be a Union soldier praying at the foot of their bed, either holding their hand or just at the foot of the bed, praying, kneeling, or standing over them, praying. And as soon as they wake up, the soldier would disappear. And one of the interesting aspects of it was at that time, the mayor was Bill Collins, and his wife, and I believe it was his mother, had both encountered this spirit over there, this ghost.
Oh, wow.
He had an interest in it. He had one time owned that house. And So you've got a Union soldier there in the middle of Summerville. As we had mentioned, we're deep south. So as Bugs Bunny would say, he took a wrong turn at Albuquerque or something. I mean, there's something just completely wrong with this picture to start with. So you start doing the research on the property and found out that was actually indeed a Confederate hospital right there. It was called Red Hill. It was nothing but a big clay Red Hill. And during Reconstruction, about 1865, they had troops come in and inhabit, Union troops come in and inhabit Summerville. And there was a group called the 35th U.S. Colored Troops, but it was led by a man by the name of Colonel James Beecher. And if you're familiar with Harriet Beecher Stowe and Uncle Tom's Cabin and all that, that was her brother.
Okay.
And he was a staunch abolitionist, and he's a minister. So I now have, a hospital there. I now have a Union soldier that actually is a minister there. So I've developed kind of a suspect. So I kind of took it along the lines of working an armed robbery. You've got a crime committed. You start developing a suspect. So now you need proper identification to get probable cause to get a warrant to arrest somebody. So what you would do was either show somebody in a physical lineup or show a person in a photo lineup. So just for giggles, I figured, let's try this thing. Let's go on Google and see how many soldiers I can find that looks like Colonel James Beecher. So I pulled up 6 photos, 6 or 9, I think, but pulled up several photos, and they looked similar, and did as I would do with a photo lineup. I would go and present it to the person, and if it was an armed robbery, I'd say the person that robbed you may be in here, they may not be in here, they may be older, maybe younger, may not be here at all, but take a little time. If you see the person, point them out and let me know. So it's kind of surreal when you start doing that, saying, the person that haunted you, that you showed up at the end of your bed and wearing a, Union soldier's uniform, may be in here, may not be in here, may be a little older, may be a little younger, may not be here at all. And the person opened up the folder that I had the pictures in and took all of about 30 seconds and picked them out.
Wow.
And said, I'll never forget his eyes. That's him right there. And I was not expecting that. That completely slapped me in the face and caught me off guard. And I'm like, okay, can I ask you where your restroom is? And she says, down the hall. And I go in there and I have to take a moment. I have to literally take a moment because I just developed probable cause that ghosts exist.
Right.
And that's just kind of rocked my world there. But being in law enforcement and having to enforce laws and all that, I had to find a balance with it. So I've got a couple of things you might not realize in this country when it comes to the legality of ghosts.
Really?
But there are actually, we have, as you understand, we have civil and criminal law in this country. So civil law, if somebody deliberately comes along and knocks down your mailbox, you can sue them.
Right.
If they do it, maliciously damaged type of things. If somebody, comes and maliciously destroys with criminal intent, maliciously destroys your mailbox. In other words, they go out with a baseball bat and beat it down. If they did it the other way, by accident, accidentally destroyed your mailbox, you can sue them. If they came out maliciously and they beat it down with a mailbox, you can charge them criminally. So that's the 2 types of laws you have, civil and criminal. So in civil law in this country, there was a case in 1991 called Stambowski versus Ackley, and it's out of New York. And what happened is Helen Ackley was selling a house to Jeffrey Stambowski, and he put down a down payment on it. And then he found out that she had declared this house haunted. She'd advertised it was haunted, had done tours there, had written an article for Reader's Digest and claimed this house was haunted. He wanted to back out of the deal. He didn't want to purchase a haunted house. He was worried about resale value, raising a family in a haunted house. He wanted out of it. And she wasn't going to give him his money back. So it ended up going all the way to the New York Supreme Court in 1991. And the appellate court there, Supreme Court in New York, overturned previous cases and said that for the sake of the sale of the house was indeed haunted. So if she had declared that it had been haunted and haunted by poltergeists and ghosts, then the poltergeist and the ghosts did exist. And they reversed it, and he got his money back. So there is civil law in this country that says that ghosts do exist.
That's really, really super cool, actually.
Now, how about criminal law? 1897, West Virginia versus Trout Shue. Trout Shue was an individual that married a woman by the name of Zona Heaster Shue. And Zona's mother, Mary Heaster, well, she didn't like him. Her affectionate nickname for her new son-in-law was Satan. So she didn't like him a whole lot. And make this a note, ladies, do not marry a man. His name is Trout Shue, so do not marry a man named after Fisher footwear. So Zona marries him. Long story short, Zona is found dead at the foot of her stairs, and it appears to be an accident. The coroner goes to investigate, but Trout Shue is so upset, he won't let him examine the body. He's just inconsolable, so they declare it an accident. And the mother is not real sure about this. She's actually very suspicious, and she thinks something has happened. So she prays about it. And then for several consecutive nights, her daughter comes back to her as a ghost. First, she comes as a ball of light in a dream. And then after that, she comes back for a few nights after that as a ghost. In fact, at one point, she's talking to her mother. She turns her back on her and turns her head completely around and says her neck was broken, says that he had attacked her because there was no meat on the table for dinner, which she couldn't put meat on the table anyway if he wasn't working. But, you know, she gives all these indicators and clues. So now the mom is on a mission. So she starts with the prosecutor. She harasses him unmercifully. And he's taking it. She's a grieving mother. She's mourning in her own way. So he tries to pacify her. It gets to the point where he can't do it any longer, just kind of play her off. So he starts looking into it, and he falls down this rabbit hole. He finds out that the coroner never actually got to investigate the body, review the body or anything of this nature. So gets to the point as he's going through interviewing all these people, he's getting real suspicious. He gets enough probable cause again to get a warrant to exhume the body. When they exhume the body, they find that fortunately for them, they buried her in West Virginia through the winter, so it preserved her body. She was frozen in the ground. So when they got her back up, she was still pretty frozen. So when they examine the body, she's got finger bruising on her neck. Her neck is broken between, I believe, the first and second vertebrae, the only vertebrae in your neck where you can spin your head completely around. All the clues start indicating that it was her husband, and it's matching up with what the ghost had told her mother. So they charge him with the murder. They take him to trial. The prosecutor says, Mary Heaster, please, for whatever, don't bring up this ghost stuff. It'll discredit you. We'll lose this case. And if you want justice for your daughter, do not bring up the ghost stuff. So mom agrees. The defense attorney brings it up to discredit her, and it backfires. It's the only case in United States history where a ghost was allowed to testify by proxy through her mother, convict her own killer, and send him to prison.
Wow.
So he served 3 years of a life sentence. Now people say, 3 years, how is that justice for this murder? Well, during the course of the investigation, they found out he'd been married 3 times. The first wife was able to escape his abusive relationship because he was in jail for stealing. The second wife was murdered because he was roofing a house with a brick, and the brick fell off and hit her in the head. Everybody roofs a house with a brick.
Right.
He killed his second wife, and then he killed Zona. So he served 1 year for each wife that he'd married, and then he died mysteriously in the hospital, in the jail, in the prison. So there is civil law and there's criminal law in this country that says ghosts exist. So as a former law enforcement officer, who am I to argue with that?
Right.
I developed probable cause they exist. So, hey, it's right in my ballpark. I put it right in my backyard there.
That is super cool. Again, there we go with the history again, man. I love it.
Yeah, history is amazing. So yeah, and there's case law in this country that says ghosts exist. So throw that at an attorney who's a medium. There you go. That was a lot of fun.
I'll bet.
That's a good argument, man. We may have to do a video on that one soon.
I'd like to see that. That would be great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So you've got 5 books now under your belt?
I do. I've got 3 in my brain here. I'm kind of kicking around and starting to do some stuff with too. So I kind of understand why Poe went crazy. Edgar Allan Poe, so I can kind of relate to him now. But yeah, I've got 5 that I've written since 2010.
There's another guy who's got ghostly ties here to the Low Country, huh?
Who's that? Oh yeah, Poe. Yeah, Edgar Allan Poe, definitely. I kind of tell people I'm in my Mark Twain, Edgar Allan Poe phase in my life, so I kind of like, Edgar Allan Poe with a Southern twist.
That's one of my favorite Charleston ghost stories. Is that the Edgar Allan Poe one, and the was it the poem that he wrote for
Annabelle Lee?
Yeah, by the sea,
got a lot
right?
of connections. The balloon hoax, the oblong box, they were influenced by Charleston. The gold bug took place on Sullivan's Island, and actually it was Dr. Edmund Ravenel was a friend of Poe's, and Poe actually, one of the characters in the gold bug is based off of Dr. Ravenel. And Edgar Allan Poe, a lot of people might not realize he tried to escape his gambling debts and his alcohol by enlisting into the United States Army under an alias, Edgar A. Perry, and he was stationed at Fort Moultrie here on Sullivan's Island under that alias. So that's his association, how he ended up in South Carolina. That's really
an interesting story. I like that whole story.
Yep. So there were a lot of influences on Poe from here.
Yeah, it's really cool too. I'll tell you, one of the coolest things I did was do some of those tours in Charleston. I think we did the prison or the jail. I'm sorry, and we did one of the cemetery tours, and that was fascinating. It was really, really fascinating. And that's where I learned the Edgar Allan Poe thing was on one of those tours. And it was great tours, man. Great tours.
Yeah, that's a lot of great tours and great folks doing tours down there in Charleston.
Yeah, for sure. So what kind of books can we expect from you next? What do you got in your head, man?
I like history, as we've talked about, but I kind of like the history that everybody kind of strays away from. And that would be kind of more like Charleston's twisted history. So, kind of the truth behind Charles II, who Charlestown was named after. Everybody wants to paint this wonderful, rosy history of Charleston. And, he was a unique character. Adulterer and everything else. So, those type of things, the scandals, the prostitution, things of that nature. So that's one of the ones I'm kind of looking at. And everybody's written about Charleston's ghost constantly. But, some things that they skip out on are kind of like the creatures, like, the Gullah Buhag or vampires or things of that nature, witches and all those type of unique characters associated with the supernatural and the paranormal. So I'm kind of exploring things of that nature.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun, man. I'd like to check that out. You're going to have to let me know when you get that on paper, and we'll have you back on to talk about it.
Yeah, there's a few things. One book I kind of completely out of it, trying to take a different route, is that I retired from law enforcement with PTSD. And at one point I trained a service dog. I had a dog that for 15 years, it would help me with the nightmares and actually come pull me out of the nightmares. And that was a unique story. So she passed away in February. And I've got another one that I'm training and trying to get to do the same thing. But I've got I started posting some stuff up on social media. She, after she passed, and some of the things that she taught me, and about learning to be more human from a dog's perspective, and what she taught me. And I got a lot of great reception. So I think I'm going to turn that into a book project. I've been working on that since February in honor of this dog that I had, who was extremely remarkable.
Now, there's something I don't think gets enough kick, is there is definitely, in my book, some sort of psychic connection with your pets, with especially, I think, dogs. I think that there's definitely a psychic connection there somehow. Whether you want to believe it or not, I think that there is for sure.
We could go on a whole different podcast with this one, but Waya is actually Cherokee for wolf. So Waya was the dog that I'm talking about. And what I did is I would get into these horrible, terrible nightmares. And no matter what I do, my brain would be smart enough to take whatever external stimuli and drag it into the dream. So if I had like a Labrador retriever, next thing I know, there would be a police dog in the middle of the situation. So Huskies are unique because they constantly change their vocalizations. So they may whimper, they may howl, they may make some kind of snarly, strange, unintelligible sounds. But what would happen is I taught her, horsing around on the bed, and then I started going into what I would do if I was sleeping, wrestling around, making moaning sounds, groaning sounds. So she would become interested and attracted to that, and she'd start responding to it. So what would happen eventually, it was kind of like a lucid dreaming type of situation to where she was the cue for it, and she was the key to get me out of it, because as I'm in a gunfight or I'm in, armed robbery in a shootout or something, the dog would come up and start making noises from a distance, and I would hear it, and there's no room for a Siberian Husky in any of this. So I would know that I was dreaming, and I'd come out of it, and the dog would come over when it was safe, and I was up on the side of the bed. It was a unique partnership. And that dog taught so much about being human and dealing with people and dealing with things. And she was a great partner.
I think that would be a perfect book, man. Like, I would read that book. I think it would be amazing. I think really that there should be more scientific study done into that connection between humans and their pets, because, like my dog, I have a black lab.
Mm-hmm.
I love this dog. Like, I'm going to be absolutely crushed. She's getting old now, and I'm going to be absolutely crushed. But he and I bought him for my wife for her birthday, and she to this day still says that I owe her a birthday present because it's my dog. I love that dog. And, if I'm upset, if I come home angry, whatever, he calms me down. Like, he comes right over. Like, he can sense that stuff, and he gives me comfort, and he snaps me out of my little funk that I'm in, and I really truly think there should be more study into that, because it is a connection, and it is there is something there, I think.
It is. I agree. And we actually have two more Huskies now. I got Luna, who is, I think she's about 8 months now. And then my wife got one, Juno, who is 4 months. So we've got two Husky pups eating everything, chewing everything up in the house. So they're hilarious. And I've made the connection now, I think in 8 months, I've made the connection with Luna. And she's going to be magnificent in her own right.
Huskies I've heard they're really hard to train. But once you do train them, like, they're super intelligent dogs. And once you do train them, though, they're good. They're just hard as pups to train.
They are hard as pups to train, but it goes back to what you were saying, because a lot of dogs you can start training and eventually develop that connection and that link.
Yeah.
For Huskies, it's the exact opposite. They're not going to listen to you until you get that link, until you get that connection. And if you get that connection first, then it's almost like you said, it's almost like a psychic connection.
Yep.
So, again, these dogs, I expect a great relationship with this new pup. But, again, with Waya, it was amazing. I could think things in that dog. It was almost like I didn't have to say a command.
Yeah. There's something to it, man, and I think that would be a perfect book. I think that you should. Yep. I think you should dig more into that, and I think that it would be perfect, man.
I appreciate that. I think so too. I think, like I said, I was overwhelmed by the response I got. It was kind of, I was like going through my grief with it, and the overwhelming response I got on social media from people and saying that they'd like to read it and hear about that relationship too. I think that would be a good tribute to her, because she was a great partner.
Yeah, I think so too. And like I said, I don't think that relationship gets enough enough of what it deserves, you know?
Right. I agree.
It's definitely a special relationship, you know, when you have that bond or whatever it is with your pet. It's a different thing, man.
Mm-hmm.
Because no matter how much you make them mad or whatever, they're always there for you, you know?
As I once said, this is one of my favorite Bruce Orr quotes. I wish all my transgressions could be paid off in cheese. Because anything I ever did to transgress my dog, you know, everything I did to offend her, I could buy her off with a piece of cheese.
Yeah.
So I wish all my transgressions in life, everything mistake I ever made, I wish I could pay that with cheese.
Yeah.
Life would be so much easier.
You're right about that, man. You are right about that.
Yeah, just some cheap single crafts, you know, slices. Oh, yeah. Just pay my debts to society.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Well, hey, man, where can everybody find you? Find your books, check out your YouTube channel and everything else. Where can they do that at?
Okay. Right now, I guess we'll start with the books. The books can, any major bookstore, you can put my name in, Bruce Orr, O-R-R, on Amazon, and the author page, and then pull up descriptions and, you know, are the books there. Right now, as far as, let's see, that was the books. Tours, I do private tours myself, and I can, usually I book those online through my email, which is Lost in Legend 1, the number 1, all one word, Lost in Legend 1 at yahoo.com. Those are private tours that I do. As far as public tours, I'll plug Bulldog here because I do public tours for Bulldog as one of their guides. And the reason I'll do that is when John Laverne created Bulldog Tours years ago, he decided he's going to put his money where his mouth is and start putting money back into these locations that they tour. So like the Yorktown or the Old City Jail, Circular Congregational Graveyard, Provost Dungeon, any of those places that Bulldog Tours has exclusive access to, they put money back into it.
Nice.
So I think in the 20 years that they've been doing these tours, they put $5 million back into Charleston.
Wow. That's impressive.
So I'm about conservation and preservation, and they are too, and that's the only reason I'll work for that company. So as far as the tours and that's where you can locate me on there. Like I said, I think History in the Shadows, just History in the Shadows on YouTube. You can find us there, and Andrea St. Amand, interesting individual. She was actually one of the, there's a short-lived television series at one time that had Freddy Krueger, Robert Englund. It was called True Terrors.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, she was one of the experts on there, one of the paranormal expert on there, and that show. And she's a local psychic medium, and you can find her on her website. Check her out, and you know, if you're interested in finding out, connecting with past loved ones and things of that nature, just check her out and see what she has to offer. And if you want to see, you know, a wildfire every once in a while, and then check out some of those videos between Andrea and I. It's not that bad. It's a lot of fun there. We have a good time. And I think that chemistry, you know, translates where when you have two sides of a coin there, you know, a yin and yang, things work out real well.
Oh yeah, for
so
sure.
I think that's a good working relationship with that. So I think that covers everything for now.
All right. Sounds good, man. Well, hey, I really appreciate you coming on and taking time out to do my show, man. I think that a lot of people are gonna dig a little deeper in this area and see how much of a wealth it has to offer as far as the paranormal goes.
Yeah.
And yeah, I really appreciate you coming on.
I appreciate you inviting me. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do it again for sure.
Definitely.
All right, Bruce. Well, you have a good night, and thank you again.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks.